Thank you very much. My presentation is the role of US-based non-governmental organizations in providing support to African governments in strengthening their educational system. But I'll focus on basic education. And now, talking of Africa as a monolith, we fall into the temptation of generalizations. But bearing in mind that the continent is very diverse, you have high performers, you have poor performers, it's such a diverse. So whatever generalization I make may not be applicable to all the countries. But I'm going to take some of those points that are generally applicable to all the countries. Now, my paper is divided into 4. I'm not going to the details. In the first part, I present a context, the background of the presentation. I try to look at Africa, the progress we have made, and I try to demonstrate that in spite of the not so glamorous picture in the media, there has been significant progress, especially in basic education. That over the past 10 years, enrollment has increased from less than 70% to over 90%. There has been an increase in other educational indicators. But in spite of that, we still have a lot of challenges in basic education. Now, if you compare to other parts of the world, we still have a very long way to go. A recent study for UNESCO shows that a large percentage of countries in Africa they are still far from the education for all goals. But there are so many challenges that have been mentioned. But these challenges are surmountable, and many African countries are on the way to surmounting these problems with international support. In the second part of my presentation, I look at the role of NGOs, the non-governmental organization. Now, NGOs have a long tradition in Africa. We can divide 2 waves. The first wave was during the colonial period. During that period, NGOs, these are religious organizations, they came to Africa, they established schools, hospitals. But after independence, there was a decline in the role of religious organizations. Now, the second wave of international organizations occurred in the 1980s and 1990s, following the introduction of structural adjustment programs, which led to the retrenchment of states, the withdrawal of state governments from public services in education and health. So, like in the past, international NGOs became gap fillers, filling the gap created by the inability of government and the private sector to invest in desired areas, especially at the grassroots level. Now, in Africa, in the past 20 years, international NGOs have continued to play a significant role, especially in basic education. Now, the verdict is mixed. To what extent they have succeeded? And these roles can be divided basically into 2 roles. One, international organizations are service providers. They try to provide services, especially at the grassroots, educational services, teacher training, building infrastructure, providing textbooks and other learning materials. Then there is the other part, policy, supporting educational policy and reform. Now, with respect to US-based NGOs, there are very many operating in Africa. Globally, there are over 50,000 international NGOs, and the number keeps growing. A study conducted by the World Economic Forum indicated that 3 years ago, there were about 46,000. The good thing, though, is that NGOs, compared to the 2 other sectors, still have greater trust. In other words, the public, they have greater trust in international NGOs than government, than the private sector. However, that trust is beginning to decline for reasons of accountability and effectiveness of some non-governmental organizations. Now, the International Foundation for Education and Self-Help was founded some 27 years ago, and the focus is to support African governments in their efforts to eradicate illiteracy, poverty, disease through self-help activities. And over the years, we have implemented a lot of programs. You'll find them in my presentation. And basically, we try to support teacher education. We also try to build schools, provide improved learning environment. We support functional literacy training for school dropouts and adults who are illiterate. We also try to support the provision of teaching and learning materials. Ours is a small organization compared to AED and other larger organizations, but we've made our modest contribution to addressing some of the challenges I've presented in my paper. Now, I would like to focus on those challenges we face in working in sub-Saharan Africa, the challenges NGOs face. One is the funding issue. NGOs, technically, we are supposed to be voluntary to help, non-profit. But ultimately, we depend on donor funding. So ultimately, we do what donors want us to do, irrespective of our mission statement, irrespective of what we would like to do. So we are a bit constrained because we are unable to raise enough unrestricted funds to do those things we feel we should do, especially at the grassroots level. Secondly, in trying to support education, sometimes we have to work in conflict and post-conflict societies, and it's extremely difficult to do that. We have had to withdraw from certain areas, or sometimes our impact is not felt because of conflict or because we are working in post-conflict societies.